Welcome to Lewis College of Science and Letters. So I'm Chris Himes. I'm the Dean of the college, and I've been at Illinois Tech. I'm just finishing my 7th year at Illinois Tech, so I've been here a while. And if you see another kind of odd screen, as I have my iPad open so that I can look at the chat box at the same time while I have my PowerPoint presentation open. But the point today is to really talk a little bit about this sort of first year experience. And one of the classes that you'll take in that very first year is the Introduction to Professions class. So you're in this group, you're here today because hopefully you're in, whoops, went too far. You're in one of these majors: applied analytics, behavioral health and wellness, communications, digital humanities, global studies, psychology, science, technology, and society, or social and economic development policy. So if none of those sound like the thing that you thought you were majoring in, just write a note and we'll be sure that you're in the right place. But these are all of our programs in the college that are in what we call our human sciences group. So we sort of have two divisions in the college. There is the science division, which is the physics, chemistry, biology, and food science departments. And then we have our human sciences program, which are the departments of psychology, humanities, and social sciences. So they're not the totally separate, two separate units, but we kind of roughly divide along those lines. And compared to the other colleges at Illinois Tech, we're a little bit smaller than engineering or computing in terms of our number of students. But what we do have is that all of the students at Illinois Tech will take courses in our department. So you'll be in classes with people from majors ranging from, aerospace engineering to architecture to business to communications and computing. So in a lot of your classes, there'll be a real mixture of students. I'd say one of the big advantages of our human science programs is that they're relatively small. And so I really urge you to take advantage of that and get to know the faculty in those departments and in your programs, because they can be really helpful. They really have a lot of knowledge and expertise and have a lot of connections. And the more you sort of take advantage of them and the chance to really have a good relationship with one of those faculty members, I think the better you'll be. So let me just know, kind of everybody put in the chat like what their major is, so get a sense of who all we have on the call. Okay, so we have psychology. Anybody else? Anybody else know what their majors are? You can just type it into the chat if you can find the chat down at the bottom kind of row of the menus. Okay, psychology tends to be one of our larger majors, so I'm not surprised that we have the psychology major here. I think our newest program is the science, technology, and society. So that's a newer program. And behavioral health and wellness is also a pretty large program. My favorite program personally is applied analytics, which is kind of a mixture of computing, statistics, and policy. So you, instead of just learning the kind of nuts and bolts of computer stuff, you learn how to apply data to real situations. So that's just my personal favorite. But all right, so it looks like we have a couple of psychology majors here. So one of the required classes for first year students is the Introduction to the Profession. And in some departments, this is done by department. So chemistry does one, physics does one, biology does one. We have found in the sort of human sciences group that it works better to combine the students in these areas because there's a lot of overlap in their programs and a lot of similarities between them. And it allows students to get to know other students who are in similar programs and form a better sense of community. So what's the goal of this class? I would say the primary objective is to prepare you to be a successful student and then to start a successful career. So it's really thinking about what are the skills that you need to be successful at Illinois Tech, and then what are the skills that you need to be successful in your career? And they're very similar, of course. And I'd say we focus on kind of 4 major issues or 4 major topics along the semester: campus resources, ethical and social justice issues, career opportunities and career paths, and then what I would kind of loosely call college skills. So I'm going to talk about a little of each of these, and in a minute, there's going to be something for you to do, so be ready. All right, so campus resources. You know, of course, the university has lots of resources for students. And one of the best things to do early on is learn what these resources are and how to access them and where to go for different kinds of problems. So we usually have a session in the library where we learn about how to use the library, how to do searches for literature, but also how to use the reference librarians and the kinds of help that they can provide. I really encourage students in the human sciences to think about doing a study abroad experience, either a semester or a summer. Is anybody here already kind of thinking they might want to do study abroad? Anybody have a chat here about their thoughts about study abroad? Yeah, so you're already studying abroad, right, by coming to the US. But, you know, we do have students, some of our international students have done study abroad. We have a program that has gone a few years to Japan, and we have some of our international students that enjoy going on that summer program. But I think we also have had in the past programs that are led by our faculty that have gone to Scotland, Japan. We're looking at a program perhaps in Australia, but partner with a lot of other institutions around the world. So you can do a semester abroad if you're English speaking in any English speaking country, basically. So we've had students in Scotland and Ireland and Great Britain and Australia. Those are places I can think of right offhand. And the advantage of the majors that you're in is that you have a fair amount of flexibility in the courses that you take. And so study abroad doesn't set you back any in terms of your credits or your progress towards your degree. And it's usually just a really wonderful experience, especially if you're thinking of ever doing any kind of international work or global work. So we do have someone come talk to us from Career Services, from the Job Placement Office. I always advise students to talk with them early on, you know, starting in like your freshman year, because they can be really helpful in finding internships, in helping you write your resume, in helping you think about the steps towards the career that you might want and what you should do in order to prepare for it. So Career Services is a really helpful office to get to know. You know, we have a ton of student activities on campus. There's a group for, I think, everything you could ever think of. There's a group for it. You know, we have like a railroad group, we have a radio group, we have a debate team, we have dance teams, we have women in science organizations, we have like really just everything. So getting involved in a student activity is just a really great experience. One office that's always good to know about once you're here is the undergraduate academic affairs, because they're the ones who will help you be sure that you're on track to graduate. Their job is to really keep track of your progress, be sure that you're meeting all the requirements in sort of a technical sense. Title IX, anybody familiar with Title IX and what that office is responsible for? Heard that term before? We have a very quiet group here, right? Yeah. So Title IX is a federal law that deals with sexual harassment and discrimination. And so Title IX is the office that deals with any issues around sexual behavior on campus and any discrimination that you feel you might be facing because of your gender. So it's important to know of their resources and the kinds of support that they can provide, and what they offer. And similarly, our Health and Wellness Center has a counseling center, which is a really valuable resource for helping students when they're very stressed, for providing kind of ways to deal with different not just for physical health issues and emotional health issues. So dealing both with physical and mental health. So the Health and Wellness Center is a good place to know about. I mean, that's just an example of the kinds of campus resources, and we usually will have somebody come from these different groups and talk a little bit about their area and explain what they do, because it's different than high school. You have a whole different set of offices. And my next slide here is about some of those differences. So I'm going to ask, does anybody know the difference between the bursar and the registrar at the college? What either of those jobs might be, or what those offices do? Do we have any fans of Hamilton, the musical? The bursar plays a role early on in that musical. So the basic difference is that the bursar's office deals with money. They're the people who collect the tuition, who deal with any kinds of fees and other sort of monetary issues. The registrar is the person who actually allows you to register for classes. And you'll find that as a new student, you'll do your registration sort of over the summer, so that when you arrive, excuse me, in the fall, you'll have your classes, sort of chosen for you, or you'll have chosen your classes. But then towards the end of the fall semester, we'll have a registration period where you register for the next spring's classes. So for instance, we just finished registration, or just in the midst of registration on campus now, for fall 2021 classes. So you always kind of register like a semester ahead. And the registrar is the person who decides, what classroom the meetings are in, what prerequisites there are for a class. And then they're also in the end where you would get a copy of your transcript, or through them, and when you finally, if you need that for a job or anything. All right, so the bursar's got to do with money, the registrar has to do with courses. What about the difference between dropping a class and withdrawing from a class? They sound like they might be the same thing, but anybody think of what a difference between those might be? So at the beginning of every semester, we have what's called an add drop period. And that's the time, it's about a week-long period where you can make adjustments to your schedule. Maybe you went to the first day of a class and you realized, whoa, this isn't at all what I thought it was going to be. I don't want to take this class. Then you can drop the class. Or you realize that a class that you did want to take, that for whatever reason wasn't available, now there are seats available and you'd like to take that class, and you can add a class. So dropping a class happens really just in the first week or so of the semester. And it's as if you never registered for the class. It doesn't show up anywhere. There's no record that you registered and then dropped. It's just nothing. Withdrawing from a class has a little bit different impact. It happens later in the semester. So you withdraw from a class after the midterm. So you can go halfway through the semester and then withdraw from a class. And usually someone withdraws from a class because they find that they're not performing well. And I have to say, I used to be sort of anti-withdrawing. I would discourage students from withdrawing from a class, but I've really come around on this and now often suggest that students withdraw from a class, because I see what happens is that if there's one class where you're really struggling, it starts to take up a lot of your time, it takes up a lot of your energy, it creates a lot of anxiety, and then that spills over into your other classes. So you end up doing poorly in other classes where the real problem is just this one class. And so sometimes it's better to just cut your losses, withdraw from the class, and move forward. If you withdraw from a class, it does show up on your transcript that you were in that class and you withdrew, but you can take it again in a later semester and then get a grade for it, and then that shows up instead. So it's a little bit more serious decision, but it's sometimes the right thing to do. So lecture versus lab, that's pretty easy maybe to understand. Several of our classes have two components, a lecture component and a laboratory component. Of course, this is most common in the sciences. So biology, chemistry, physics, those programs or those classes are going to often have a lecture and a lab component. And you need to usually do both. They're sort of integrated where the lab is connected to the lecture. Labs are usually scheduled for longer blocks of time, so they don't always need that full amount of time, but they're longer time periods where you can, if you're running experiments or things, you have the time to actually do it. All right, so one of the other things that's always kind of hard to sort of figure out is what's the difference between the chair and the dean and the provost. So I'll give you just a little bit of college 101. The chair of your department is responsible for all of the things that happen in, say, the psychology department or the social sciences department. All of the faculty, if you have a problem with a faculty member in that department, your first thing should be to go to the chair. If you have a question about the department or anything you need to know about the department, often best to start with the chair. All of the chairs then report to me as the dean. So I have the 7 different chairs: biology, physics, chemistry, food science, psychology, social sciences, and humanities, that all kind of report to me. And so if there are problems with the chair, then you come to me and talk to me as the dean. If there are issues that can't be resolved by the chair or problems that they can't solve for you, then it comes to the dean. And then the next level is the provost. So all of the deans report to the provost. So at Illinois Tech, we have, I'm not sure how many colleges we have: the law school, the business school, Institute of Design, architecture, computing, College of Science and Letters, and engineering. So I think that's everybody, 7 colleges. So each of those have a dean, and each of those deans, all of those deans then report to the provost. So that's sort of the hierarchy of the university. And so the person you're going to have the most contact with, though, is your academic advisor. So your academic advisor is a member of the department where your program is located. And they're the person who you really will meet with first to register for classes for the fall, and then meet with every semester to think about your next semester registration. But they really can do more than help you with just registration. They can also be a good source of kind of career advice, like, what if I want to go into this field, what would be the right class to take? Or what's the difference between this specialization or that specialization? So since your academic advisors are actually in the departments, they really know the details of the department and the career paths in that department really intimately. So they're really the most important person for you to get to know. And they can be really helpful in solving problems and cutting through red tape and doing all kinds of things for you. So the academic advisor is probably the most important person out of all of those. You'll probably accept it, the opening ceremonies or something. I hope, I don't have to see any students in my office. I mean, I love to see students, but hopefully there aren't problems that, have to come to me or the provost or even the chair. But if there are, we're happy to try to resolve them. But your academic advisor is really the person that you'll have the most contact with. So that's a little bit about the different kinds of campus resources and the sorts of information that we'll go over in the ITP class, the Introduction to Profession class. Let me just stop for 1 second to see if there are kind of any questions or anything more you'd like to know about campus resources. I did just think of one thing I forgot to mention is the Office of Disability Services. So if you need accommodations for any kind of disability, that would be the office that you would work with to determine what those accommodations would be, whether it has to do with a certain kind of scheduling of classes or extra time for exams or note-taking services or other kinds of things like that. The Office of Disability Services is important to know in that regard. So one of the other topics, oops, went the wrong way. One of the other topics in the ITP class that we take really seriously is thinking about ethical and social justice issues. And so part of this are, what are the ethical obligations of my profession? What are my responsibilities to fellow students and people on campus? And we spend some time talking about what academic dishonesty is, and why that's important to understand, and why academic honesty is a value that we hold very highly at Illinois Tech, and how violating sort of the code of academic honesty is really kind of hurting not just you, but your fellow students. So we spend some time on each of those issues, and I just wanted to give an example of the kind of ethical issues we might discuss. And so here, this is a picture that was taken in Italy a couple years ago. And if you can see, so this is a guy sort of taking a selfie while in the background, medics are attending to a woman who was injured on the train tracks. And when this photo was published, there was just sort of this big uproar about how rude it was for somebody to be sort of taking a selfie with this in the background. And so we talk about that. What are the ethical issues here? When is it appropriate to take a selfie? When is it not? What are your obligations as a journalist? Should the journalist have even printed and published this picture? Should the journalist have been taking a picture of the injured woman? What's the difference between a journalist taking the picture and someone taking the picture as a selfie? What are the different ethical obligations of a profession versus an individual? What are our kind of responsibilities and to each other and to privacy, and how do we maintain those privacy limitations? And so it was, we have topics like this where we'll have some discussions about, ethical issues around inclusion and equity. We do some exercises where we sort of simulate different kinds of situations and the way that some groups are disadvantaged and how that disadvantage might accumulate over their lifetime and the implications of that. So there are a lot of, particularly in this class, because we're in human sciences, there's a lot of emphasis on social issues, social policy, ethical behavior. So I don't know if you guys have been pretty quiet so far, but does anybody want to make any comments about selfies, their experience with selfies, and if there are times when they're inappropriate or places where they're inappropriate? So I have to say, of course I'm a little bit older, but I do find that, there are places where I've been visiting, sort of cathedrals and things, and it seems like people are more interested in finding the best place to take a selfie than sort of appreciating the architecture or the, nature of the space. And so maybe I'm just a little bit old, but that does kind of bug me, I must say. So, but I think technology has made us really, somewhat less aware of what we're doing. We don't think about the implications in the same way, or think about where those pictures are going. who's going to see this? And there are lots of examples of people who have posted something they thought was a relatively innocuous comment to just friends that, then went viral and affected their careers, affected their lives. And, you can think of a lot of examples in the last few years of things like that happening where people just didn't really think about the role that technology was going to play in their actions. So I think, we, especially since we're at a technology university, a lot of our discussions focus on the ethical use of technology. What are the ethical uses of technology? How do we decide that? How can technology be used in unethical ways? There's a lot of discussion around things around artificial intelligence. What does it mean for things to be artificially intelligent? People aren't even sure that's really the right term. And then how are things, so there were a lot of examples recently of things like facial recognition software that recognizes different ethnic faces in different ways. Same thing is true for voice recognition software. So there are algorithms that are built in to favor one group or another, not necessarily intentionally, but because no one has really thought through the biases that might get introduced by a set of questions just by the nature of the question. So those are the kinds of topics that we'll spend some time talking about, and we usually have some great discussions. It's much easier to do in person maybe than it is to do over Zoom, but I think at least this gives you maybe a little bit of a sense of the, the kinds of discussions we like to sort of promote in class. All right, so I don't know why I keep going the wrong way here. So the final kind of area is really talking about your different career pathways. And I would say psychology, humanities, social sciences prepare you for a wide range of careers. And that can be good because you have lots of options, but it also can be bad because it's not like there's a specific, like, oh, I'm going to be an accountant, or, oh, I'm going to be a civil engineer, or something. There's a little bit less specificity, which gives you more options, but means you have to take a little more responsibility for your career planning. So I always tell students the story of my career plan, which was no plan at all. But I started college as a chemistry major. I don't really remember why, but I only lasted in chemistry for a semester. It wasn't at all like high school chemistry. And at that time, again, I'm a little bit older, at that time, if you were a science major, you were also required to study what they called a science language, which was either German or Russian at the time. So this is during Cold War days. So I just thought Russian sounded more interesting, and my sister was studying German, and I didn't want to do the same as her, so I started taking Russian classes. And I decided I did not want to be a chemistry major, but I really enjoyed the Russian classes. So I continued studying Russian and then changed my major after a few fits and starts into business, and particularly into business statistics. So my degree was in management statistics, and I had a dual degree in Russian language. And I spent a semester in Moscow as a student at a Russian language institute there, which was just a really wonderful experience. So here I am, I graduated with this sort of business and Russian degree, and my thought was, well, I'll go, like, I don't know, sell things in Russia. But there wasn't a big demand for people who wanted to go sell things in Russia. So I ended up working for a small company in Indiana where I grew up that was a packaging firm. And we packaged small sample size, like sample size shampoo and lotion and soap things. So we had these machines that would make these little packages, and we would wrap them and put them in boxes. And I was the purchasing agent. So I figured out like how much plastic we needed to buy for each of these jobs. It wasn't a great job, but it was a job. But I decided I really needed to find something that was going to be more of a career. So I took a job then at the Indiana State Legislature, where I worked as what was called a legislative analyst. And legislative analysts would say a person in the legislature came and said, we want to raise, the tax on cigarettes. And so my job was to figure out, well, how much more money would we raise by different kinds of tax increases? And then how would we distribute that money? What are the different options? And so I would run these kind of different analyses for the legislators, and then they would pick the one that they liked the best, which was usually the one that helped their, congressional district the most. But that was, how we sort of made decisions. And that was a really great job, and I enjoyed that. But I thought, there's not really a future there either. So I started to work on a master's in math because I'd had this kind of degree in statistics. And I started taking classes to get a master's in math, and then decided that I really didn't like that much. So I didn't like chemistry. I didn't like selling things, or I wasn't going to sell things in Russia. I didn't like being a purchasing agent for a packaging firm. I didn't even finish my master's in math. I just took a few classes. And then somebody told me about this area of study called demography. And demography is this great combination of analysis and mathematics and social issues. So demographers look at trends in the population. How is the population changing? How is fertility changing? Mortality changing? Where are people moving to? What are the migration patterns? So it had a very kind of mathematical side to it, but it also was something that had, kind of a policy interest, or had like a human side to it. So it seemed like the perfect fit. So I got my graduate degree in demography, and then I thought, okay, I've worked for the state. Now I'll get a doctorate degree and I'll go work for the federal government, and I'll work for like the Social Security Administration or the Census Bureau or someplace like that. That was my intention when I started graduate school. But graduate school has this way of kind of molding you into a professor. And so I ended up as a professor instead. And so I worked at Penn State University for several years. Then I was at Syracuse University for about 20 years. And now I've been at Illinois Tech. So within that area of demography, my specialization is in the health of the older population. So what are the trends in health problems and diseases in the older population, and how are those going to affect healthcare needs in the future? How are they going to affect the needs for family care? How are they going to affect people's lives and ability to work? And so issues around that. So that's kind of a long story. Bear with me, it's a lot to bear with, to listen to. But the point is that there were lots of different starts and stops in my career. And it wasn't for several years till I kind of really found, like my area. And so I tell that to students as a way to try to provide some encouragement that if you don't know exactly what you want to do, and even if you do think you know exactly what you want to do, you might change your mind. And changing your mind is good, and keeping your options open is good, and follow the things that you're interested in, and eventually you'll find some way to put them together. So I'd always been kind of interested in law and policy. I'd been on like the high school debate team. I'd always been interested in health and medicine. I'd thought a little bit about going to medical school. And I had this kind of ability. I wouldn't say I was really interested in math, but I had abilities in math. And so this was a way to kind of combine the health stuff and the policy stuff and the analytic stuff all into one. And that's why applied analytics is also my favorite major, because it would have been like the perfect major for me as an undergraduate. So we'll talk a little bit about we'll have different speakers come in and talk about the different, their career paths and how they got to where they are, and the kinds of choices they made along the way. We might even have like Diana come and talk about how she went from a psychology major to working in admissions. How do you make those decisions? How does that happen? We'll also talk a little bit about professional schools and graduate schools. So we have a really unique program with, Illinois Tech has a law school associated with it. And we have a program where students can take 3 years as an undergraduate and then transfer to the law school and do their 3 years law school. And so they, reduce their amount of time in school by 1 year. And that can be a real advantage if interested in law school. We have some connections to different medical schools, so there's opportunities there. The people who go on to law school, med school, to get graduate degrees in psychology, to get graduate degrees in political science, to get graduate degrees in digital humanities or media studies. So we, lots of options that way. And what I sort of emphasize is that all of the programs in our college really give you great skills in communication, analysis, and what I would call sort of strategy of sort of thinking through problems. So being able to really think through a problem, collect the data necessary to evaluate the problem and analyze that data, and then communicate the results. And we'll often find that students with these sets of skills, and this is true if you talk to a lot of business people, these are all the things that they're looking for in new employees. They can train you in a lot of things, but if you come in with some of these skills, that is a real advantage. So let's see if I can hit the right button this time. Yes. So the final area, I guess I said the last was the final area. The final area is college skills. And this is something we sort of just do throughout the semester in the ITP class, is talk about, ways to manage your time, note-taking skills and ideas, writing, how do you paraphrase something, how do you, how do you write a good email to a job opportunity or to a professor. We do some things around oral communication, making presentations, interviewing people. So a lot of those are all just skills that we practice in different activities through the semester. We talk about how to utilize office hours of professors, that this can be a really valuable opportunity that a lot of students are afraid to take advantage of. And then some of the, again, in terms of kind of resources, there is the University, the Academic Resource Center and a writing center and some other things associated with those groups that can help you form study groups for particular classes, that can provide tutors, that have a variety of resources for classes. So we'll just sort of talk about some of those throughout the course of that first semester to get you kind of well-grounded.